Welcome back to the Donkey Vote Political Podcast for another episode talking about politicians' careers before politics. And today we are joined by the not necessarily newly elected, but pretty freshly elected member for Casey, Aaron Violi. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yep,
Violi.
got it right,
Yeah,
Fred. Yep,
yeah.
Violi, yes.
Thank you for joining us, Aaron.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Just before we get started with our questions, are you able to talk briefly to our audience a bit about yourself? Because I'm going to assume many people within our audience might not know much about you at all.
Very, very, very safe assumption as the new MP. As you said, so elected as the federal member for Casey in the May 2022 election, so 18 months into the role now, replaced Tony Smith, who was the member for Casey for 20 years before retiring and Speaker of the House for six. So very fortunate to have spent my life living in the electorate of Casey. And I would say to your listeners, there's always a little bit of confusion. So the federal seat of Casey takes in the Shire of Yarra Ranges. So it's Mooroolbark, Chirnside, Lilydale, all the way up to the Yarra Valley and the Dandenong Ranges. No connection to the city of Casey, which takes in, I think, Clyde and Berwick and other areas down a bit further south. So we do get a little bit of confusion with people between the city of Casey and the federal seat. So I'm out in the sort of outer east in the Yarra Valley and Dandenong Ranges, and lucky enough to have spent my life living in this area. My family I'm third generation. My family came across from Italy in the 1950s and had a farm in a small town called Sylvan, and then moved that to Coldstream. So agriculture is a big part of our community. It's a big part of my family and my family's story. And I know we'll go into detail, but yeah, prior to politics, spent 15 years working in business with a short stint in 2016 with Senator Patterson working on the 2016 election.
Hmm. Yeah. Just quickly as well. I think so. Last weekend I was actually on a camp. I was helping out at my local church, and our camp was actually, I believe, in your electorate. So it was in Yarra Junction, Westburn area. So I was there
Yep.
for the weekend. So yeah, it's a very nice place, especially it's very hilly around that area. You know, the terrain and the bush shrubs and that sort of thing. Like the forestry there is really cool. It's a really nice
Yeah,
area, especially to have a camp and that
it's
sort of thing.
yeah, it's a beautiful area. It is very much, it's the cliche where the city meets the country, but Lilydale, where I live, is the final suburb before you're out to Warburton and Yarra Junction and farmland and national parks and bushland. So creates, and I might talk about it at some point, does create some political challenges because whether we're considered metro or regional or rural and sort of peri-urban, which is the new phrase that gets used a bit, create some challenges for us around funding. But yeah, it's a beautiful area. Very lucky to represent it.
Yeah. We'll now get started with our questions. So my first question is, how was your high school and university life, and do you have any memorable moments?
Yeah, it was. I was really lucky. I went to it, and I was there last night actually for their awards ceremony. But went to Mount Lilydale Mercy College, so the Catholic high school here in Lilydale and in the electorate, and it was. I mean, it's a little bit cliche, but it was a pretty normal high school and experience. The school's a great school, well set up. So I had lots of great educational opportunities. It wasn't anything extraordinary. I wasn't, academically wasn't in the top 10 or anything like that. Just tried to have a good balance of academic sports. I played a lot of sport and really invested in that as a young person, but also involved in community and primarily through the sport and on committees at a young age. So that was looking back, a pretty good thing to have a bit of balance between the academics and the sport and social. And the flip side is, looking back 20 years later, probably could have been a little bit more disciplined in how much work I did. Probably didn't apply myself as much as my mum would have liked. But my parents split when I was in grade 6, so that had an impact through my life, and something I talked about in my first speech, and created some challenges, but looking back wouldn't change it. And then so it was always politically active as well. So in year 11 studied year 12 politics, so I did that a year ahead of time, and then actually did an arts degree majoring in politics at university. I was at La Trobe University, and I think one of the the most interesting things about university that was probably memorable from a political perspective and did shape a little bit of how I ended up as a Liberal. Because if I take a step back, I grew up in a Labor household, so I had an interesting journey of, if you'd asked me at 15, I would have considered myself a Labor person, but it was much like I was following, the footy team that my family supported. So there was no thought to it other than, okay, well, my family's Labor, so I'm Labor. But then as I went on my political journey, realised that my values and what I believed in and what I stood for actually aligned with the Liberal Party. And one of the key moments that really solidified that for me was at university. I was there when the Howard government implemented voluntary student unionism. And so I saw that, and I remember thinking at the time, well, if the student union is not adding value to students, why should they be forced to pay the money? And I'd also was working in hospitality, and we'd had a different, I won't name them, but we'd had a different university student union come out for one of their offsites, and to see the amount of money they spent on alcohol at that event, which was essentially paid for by other students because it was all on the union credit card, didn't sit well with me. It's like, why does this group of people deserve free food and alcohol when I'm a poor, struggling uni student? So that was interesting, and that really, and there was a lot of, as you can imagine, discussion on campus, some supporting, some not. And when you're doing an arts degree, every class sort of went back to those conversations, and that was probably the final moment where I went from this journey of realizing that my personal values were actually aligned with the Liberal Party, not where my family had sat. So that was quite transformational, and that whole journey of studying politics was wonderful. But it also made me realize that if I did want to end up as a member of Parliament and have a career in politics, I felt there was two paths, and the easier one and the more traditional one was to become a staffer and work for an MP and get involved in a political party and go that path. And the second one, the more unconventional, a little bit harder, but I did believe would give me better perspective if I was successful, was to stay out of party politics and focus on building a career in business and building, I guess, connections to my community and going down that path and then joining later on. So, and that was the path I ultimately went on. I stayed out of student politics and stayed out of party politics, didn't join the Liberal Party until about 10 years ago, till I was about 28, 29, until I'd established myself in business. I'd completed an MBA because I'd worked out that the arts degree was good fun, but didn't have a lot of applicable lessons for business. And so I was becoming relatively senior in my business career and felt that an MBA would help that. So once I finished the MBA, I then went into join the Liberal Party and got deeply involved in local and wider party politics.
Yeah, I think just to touch on your point there as well. You, as you said, you didn't join the Liberal Party until 10 years ago. So I think it's an important thing that, like, you don't necessarily have to join political parties in university or in youth in your like younger years. You can join later on, like no matter what age. You can join a political party. And it doesn't and if you're not part of a political party, it doesn't necessarily mean you still can't be an activist within your community and pushing issues and that sort of thing. Like, you know, there's no there's no boundaries to what you can achieve, even if you're not part of a political party in terms of activism.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, not being part of a party early on in your life gives you freedom. And and for me as well, gives you opportunities and to really make sure you're in. Yeah, because again, if I'd joined a party, at 16 or 17, I would have joined the ALP, and it would have been the wrong decision. So it's important you spend some time to reflect on who you are, and because once you join a party, it is a big commitment. But yeah, there's many paths, and it's one of the unique opportunities, but to be honest, challenges about becoming a member of Parliament is there is no right or wrong way, and that diversity of experience and thoughts and skill sets is what makes Parliament so strong. So it's not like if you want to become a teacher, you know there's a clear pathway to become a principal, and you follow that pathway. Politics is not like that, which is one of the great strengths of our democracy, but obviously makes it quite challenging when you're on that journey making those decisions.
Exactly. You don't have to study politics to become a politician, You
No,
can do
absolutely
whatever.
not.
Like, we've talked
Correct.
to many politicians. Some have been in trade, some have been lawyers, some have set up their own businesses, some have been in the union movement. They come from all walks of life entering politics. But I think the one key thing that they do all have in common is that they had a issue within their local community that they wanted to push more and that they thought wasn't being represented clearly by previous members. So that's why they ran for politics in Parliament.
It's a very common theme, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll now move on to our second question. I believe that's with you, George.
Yeah. So my question is, can you talk to us about your previous career before politics? I believe you used to work as a food manufacturer and in the digital economy. Could you briefly talk about those careers and the whole transition in general into being a parliamentarian?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're correct, George. Yeah, spent time at food manufacturers and then at a tech company in the digital economy. So I was fortunate after university to start at a local company called Yarra Valley Snack Foods. So based in Lilydale, where I was living or still live. Um, Funnily enough, it wasn't a plan. It was more good luck. The owner of the company and I played cricket together, and so I'd finished university and he needed someone to actually work in their warehouse. And so I started that as a summer job and then sort of did that over summer when they're busy at Christmas on a forklift. And then from there, transitioned into a sales role. And so spent 12 months as a sales rep and then was fortunate that as the company grew, my roles and responsibilities grew as well. And looking back, was put into leadership roles probably before my time and before I was quite ready, but was able to adapt and learn and grow through his support and having people around me. So I spent 7.5, almost 8 years at that company. We grew from 7 employees when I first started to when we got bought out by private equity, and I think we were up to between 130 to 150 employees with casuals and part-timers and contractors and that at that stage. So we'd grown significantly, and I was, as I said, fortunate that every time we needed to promote, I was promoted, and then people came in under me. So I was running the sales team there for quite a few years and in leadership roles, which provided some amazing life lessons, some amazing experiences that I still use in politics. But also I was able to see firsthand the challenges that we had at Yarra Valley Snack Foods as we grew. And in many ways, I describe it as being able to feel like I was running a business and be involved in those discussions, because what happened about 2 or 3, 4 years, at some point, time blurs a bit, but in that time, Andrew, the owner, we'd made a decision that he was going to support me to become the general manager one day, and that's when I did my MBA. And so I was getting involved in conversations that were outside of the sales scope that I had. So it gave me great exposure to what it's like running a business. But I admit and say that I was very fortunate that I didn't have the pressure of having to make payroll and balance, cash flow and all those challenges that small business owners have. So I was fortunate to, in many ways, live the experience of a small business owner without the pressure. But also Andrew himself is a friend and mentor and very political. So he knew about my politics and my passion for it, and spent time talking to me about his frustrations about the political system and his frustrations as a business owner about government policies that inhibit growth and things like that. So that really shaped my thinking as well. And looking back, I feel fortunate. It was almost an apprenticeship in business and leadership, but also in politics in many ways. So that was a really wonderful time in my life, and my wife Rachel, we met at that time, and also being local was a benefit as well, because I could then start balancing my local political commitments once I joined the party with my work, and then I was building naturally, connections within the local community that are still paying off today as the local MP. So I was there for about, I said, 7 years. 2016, I left and went to work for Senator James Patterson, who'd just become a senator, the youngest Liberal senator in Victoria at the time. And that was a deliberate decision to work full-time on the 2016 election campaign. So I worked with Julia Banks in Chisholm and Helen Kroger in Bruce, and got to essentially work full-time on a political campaign. Financially, a terrible decision, but it was something I wanted to do because I didn't know where my career would go, but I wanted to at least say I'd worked full-time on a campaign. And again, I learned so much by doing that and working with James, and then went from there to Mars Australia. So given I'd worked in a small business, I was really keen to work at a global multinational, because that's a different experience, a different skill set. I went there and spent 3 to 4 years at Mars. And at that time, I started in Wrigley Confectionery, so Extra Chewing Gum and Eclipse Mints are their two biggest brands, and Starburst and Skittles. Wrigley Confectionery merged with Mars Chocolate, so I was thrown in from day one to working and managing a team of 30 people as we were going through this really tough merger, and people had job insecurity and other challenges, and there was a lot of leadership and life lessons I learned, but also it really brought home for me the importance of a job and the impact. I never forget this, and I won't in this job, when you have to tell people that they no longer have employment, and you see the devastation in their face. That's heartbreaking. And I take that experience with me now, and it's a reminder of the obligation and opportunity we've got to make sure, when we've got a strong economy, we've got low unemployment, those numbers, if unemployment ticks up, that's a number on a sheet that we talk about, but there's people behind that, and the pain they go through, not just economically, like the impact it has on their self-worth as a person is profound. And I've seen that, through my career, having to make tough decisions with people. And I don't want to forget that experience, because sometimes in politics you can lose the humanity of what you're doing, because you're working at such a macro level, particularly with the economy. So I was there for 3 or 4 years, leading a team through a significant change and merger, and then moved from there to a tech startup. So I wanted to get out of FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, because I'd been there for over a decade and felt it was time to broaden my horizon, both professionally but also politically. And I saw the digital economy as this growing space. Again, one of the interesting things about being political and having an ambition to become an MP is when you make career decisions, well, I found when I made career decisions, it was through two lenses. What was the impact on my business and my professional career, but also how could it impact politically, one, helping me to get pre-selected, but if I am pre-selected and become a member of parliament, giving me some broad experiences that will make me an effective member of parliament. So they were always the sort of two filters that I made any decision through. And I saw tech and the digital economy as such a big space that professionally it was an area I wanted to be part of, but also politically, I knew that it was going to be something that was going to become topical in parliament if I was lucky enough in the future to get selected. So I wanted that experience. Spent 3 years at a tech startup called Ritual, a CBD-based food ordering platform, which is a really successful model until COVID shuts down CBDs globally, and we lost 90% of revenue in 2 weeks. But again, some really profound experiences managing people, managing difficult situations, and again, seeing the devastation of small business owners losing their businesses, losing their livelihoods because of the decisions of governments. And I'm not going to run a commentary on whether it was right or wrong, what happened. But again, when you're talking to people that have put their heart and soul and their life into a cafe, and they have to declare bankruptcy because there's no one in the city, it's again that reminder of what we do in Canberra, and as members of parliament have a profound impact on people, not just economically, but on their emotional state, their physical well-being. So that was a wonderful experience working in a tech startup, and has really led to my career in Parliament, focusing on tech and innovation. And was I'm the co-chair and the founding co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Tech and Innovation, co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of AUKUS, and really wanting to focus on digital, and how that can solve some of the big economic challenges that we have, but also the national security challenges and the climate change challenges that we have. A lot of the opportunities that we have and the challenges that we face will be solved by technology. So really grateful I did that, made that pivot in my career, and the 3 years there before being pre-selected by the party.
Yeah, that was a really good answer there, Aaron. A really, really good answer. But I think for especially for Tobias and George as well, I think you both are hoping to get into that IT sort of field. So,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
it's a really important thing that especially with you starting your own tech startups, like that politics in general and even governments understand that IT and that sort of thing. Like I know Tobias wants to get into cybersecurity. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then George, do you know specifically what you want to do in IT, or just pretty
Just like probably like make computer science, something like that.
Oh, okay, yeah, so that sort of thing. So I
Yeah.
think it's important that governments in general, hopefully with your leadership, Aaron, continue to push towards you know, being more savvy towards technology and getting ready, because in the future, all around us right now, even what we're doing right now, using Zoom, it's all technology. So we got to be ready for the future, especially you know, with a more and more dependency on technology and IT in
Yeah.
general.
Absolutely, and good careers to get into. So I mean, and I'll be quick on this one, but cyber, and I feel fortunate. I spoke about the risk of cyber in my first speech and the opportunities in the digital economy. And 3 months later, the Optus hack happened, and suddenly everyone in Parliament's talking about cyber. And then ChatGPT blew up, and everyone's talking about AI. So you're right; these things move pretty quickly. My prediction is that 2024, everyone will be talking quite a bit about quantum. So I feel lucky that my experience and skill set is really dovetailing with what a lot of the political conversations are. And we're skill shortages that we've got in cyber and in computer science is exactly what we need to solve as a country. So it's good to hear that the guys, a couple of you, are looking to get into that space. There's lots of demand, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's our future, as I said before. So, good thing that Tobias and George want to try and get into that space. Maybe
Absolutely.
one day they'll be working for the government with you, Aaron, in the future.
Exactly. Well, there's plenty of opportunities in the public sector and the private sector, and things like defence as well with the ADF. I got to do a parliamentary course with them, and they're investing heavily in cyber, and so there's plenty of opportunities. So no doubt. One thing I've learned in life, Francis, is people's paths cross in many ways. So I'm sure they will at some stage in the future.
Yeah. We'll now move on to our third question. Tobias.
Yes, I do have it. Could you talk about your connection with the local sporting club in KC electorate?
Yeah, thanks, Tobias. It's sports has been a huge part of my life. Again, I spoke about it in my first speech. I've grown up here and played sport since I was 5 or 6. Soccer at Mooroolbark, the local club, cricket up at Hillsville, and then a bit of AFL football at the Mount Lilydale Old Collegians, and soccer at Mount Lilydale Old Collegians. And
What was your best sport out of the three, Aaron?
Probably cricket. I was I'm gonna just pump my own tires up. I played in the Polly's versus Press cricket game last year and made 50 not out. So that was a nice way to start my parliamentary cricket career. Although it is all downhill from here, that was the only problem. But so I was probably a more talented cricketer, and enjoyed the soccer and was a pretty bad footballer, to be honest. I just went to play with my mates at the Amo's D4 level. So, but it was good fun. And what I loved about the sport, and particularly in Casey, as I mentioned before, that sort of more rural regional areas, your sporting clubs are the heart of the community. It brings people together, 2 nights a week for training and on a weekend. And, we'd spend, Thursday night we'd be playing cards at the cricket club, and then Saturday you'd be back at the club or one of the local, pubs to catch up with people. So it created such a great environment. I mentioned, my parents split when I was in grade 6. So to have a lot of father figures at different sporting clubs was really important going through those teenage years, and owe a lot to those, those people at the clubs at the time, which they were just doing what they've always done, which is supporting the young kids coming through. And, for me, it was particularly valuable. So, it's been, again, nice I had my community awards on the weekend, and one of the guys, Tojo, who I played cricket with 20 plus years ago, he got nominated for a community award because of his work in the community for Hillsville Cricket Club and Footy Club. So that's been a really nice part of the role. And being the MP where you've grown up, you run into and catch up and recognise people that you spent your life with. So that makes the role even more meaningful for me. And so I see the opportunity as an MP to invest back into community groups. And I'm really careful to say it's not just sporting clubs, because I know sport was my thing, but, scouts and guides is just as powerful for people that are passionate about that, dancing, equestrian, Rotary, all these community groups, men's sheds, build connection, community houses. There's so many of them. They build that connection and social cohesion for people. And, we saw that through COVID, how important connection is mentally, physically, emotionally. So I see my role as in a very simple term, how can I support those clubs and those volunteers to do what they want to do? So whether it's financially, recognise them, say thank you. It is such a crucial part of our community. We have small towns, whether it's Warburton or, Yarra Junction, France, where you went. So, and each town has its own footy club. It's got its own RSL. It's got its own Rotary. And it is the heart and soul of the community in so many ways. So I feel fortunate that I can help those clubs continue to grow and to thrive, particularly off the back of the last couple of years. But sport gave me a lot of who I am today. A lot of the values and that I have come from sport. Some really explicit, like teamwork, and others you just pick up, like hard work and growth mindset and things sort of more subliminally. And then when you look back as you get older, you realise that the value they've brought. So how we can continue to support them. And the other thing about sporting clubs, if I look back at my time, it was, very male dominated. And I've got an 8-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, and they both play soccer. So it's funny, it's interesting watching them go through their journey that I went through, but also for my daughter, being able to watch the Matildas and cheer them on. And she doesn't know a world where she could become a professional soccer player, a professional AFL player. That's just her normal. I think that's really special because, young girls deserve the same opportunities and the same lessons that young men like myself had. So I've got a big focus, and it's probably, it shouldn't be because I'm a dad, but, being a dad to a daughter just brings it home. And that is one of the key things about our roles that I talk about in Parliament a lot. And why I'm so glad I didn't go down the political path is because our lived experiences shape who we are and shape the representatives that we become.
Exactly. And I think as well, especially talking about with your daughter, getting into soccer, like especially like we've come a long way. Like 20 years ago, I don't think anyone would have heard of the Matildas back then. So especially
No,
now,
yeah.
what women's sport 10, 15, like 10, 15 years ago was
So
just wasn't really much of a
was,
thing, and nowadays it's
yeah.
huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there was a young lady that played cricket with me, and she played under 12s with us. And then when we went to under 14s, she was literally told, "Oh, girls can't play under 14s, so you need to stop playing." And that was just the way it was, because there was no women's teams 25, 30 years ago. And she didn't have a pathway, and they thought they were doing the right thing for her to keep her safe from a cricket perspective. But now there's most clubs have their own women's cricket teams and footy teams, so it does create a challenge with infrastructure, club rooms and things like that, because they're not up to scratch. So that's something I'm really focused on, is how we can help clubs invest in change rooms and toilet facilities and separate, so the men and the women and the boys and the girls aren't sharing the same change rooms and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. More upgrades towards women's sport in the future is going to always help, generate a new generation of sporting heroes, especially what we've seen now with the Matildas. And, I guess sporting success, even in male and female codes, is going to always help, future generations, and it's going to entice more people to join teams, and with more people in teams, there'll be more money generated, which will then mean that we can upgrade, sporting facilities and that sort of thing. So, the more
and we're seeing
recognition we get, the better.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're seeing the clubs more numbers. Summer series soccer numbers, girls' numbers are through the roof, like 3-4 times what they were last season. So it's a great thing.
Always shocked by Curly over there, I can tell you that. Mr. Speaker, we've got...
Order. The Treasurer will remove himself from the chamber under the provisions of Standing Order 94A. The Honourable Member for North Sydney.
My question, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer and not the Treasurer, then the Assistant Treasurer. Who is the Treasurer over there?
The Honourable Member for North Sydney will remove himself from the chamber under the provisions of Standing Order 94A. And if I see a repetition of such conduct, any honourable member doing that will be named. The Leader of the House,
yes,
on
Mr.
a
Speaker.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The member for North Sydney may not have heard your ruling asking him to leave the chamber for 1 hour.
Oh, is he still here?
Shampoo do I use? Mark, I honestly don't know what shampoo I use. It's the same stuff that I use for all sort of cleaning purposes, and it's blue. That's all I know. It's blue.
After a little short little ad break, a little tea break, I guess, or lunch break if you're watching cricket, which should be starting in a couple of days, actually. We're back with our questions. So I believe, George, you have the next question for Aaron.
So my question is, what made you run the 2022 federal election and join the Liberal Party?
Yeah, so I've kind of touched on why I joined the party. It was started as a Labor family, but really through my education, through my work, I realised that the values of individual responsibility, freedom of speech, things like that really spoke to me more. And what I realised is that governments have a responsibility to create an environment where everyone can succeed, and the best way to do that is to have a strong economy, make sure we've got strong borders, we're safe and secure as a country, and then allows people to thrive and create opportunities. It's not governments that create jobs, it's governments working to create an environment where business will create jobs. And so that was really that transformation for me to become a Liberal, and it was more around that economic policy and economic beliefs that aligned with mine, but also thinking that government shouldn't be involved in people's lives and a day-to-day. Let people make their own decisions, provided they're not harming other people. Then they should be free to live their life as they see fit. And then so I'd always had this interest in politics, and what made me become, I guess, put my hand up to serve. Well, I didn't know that the opportunity to become the member for Casey would happen until Tony retired. So Tony Smith retired he was only 55, which is relatively young, and he's still working now, so he's not fully retired, but he stepped away as the member and made that announcement in 2020, 2021. Yes, June 2021, July 2021, he stepped aside, and then I put my hand up for pre-selection. But I think it's really important that I say this, and I've always said it. I didn't run to become a member of parliament. I ran to become the member for Casey. So I've always been really clear that there was only one seat that I wanted to represent, and it was this seat because it's where my home is, it's where my community is. And I fundamentally believe that if you want to be a lower house member of parliament, you should have a deep connection and live in the electorate that you want to represent. I couldn't do this job and be away from my family as much as I am if I wasn't representing my home and my community. So I was really specific on that. And that brings risk because, again, Tony's 55. If he'd decided to stay for another 10 years, I wouldn't have been challenging him. He would have been the member for Casey for as long as he wanted it. So, 10 years' time, I'm suddenly in my late 40s and my career's moved to another place, and I might not have been the right person for this electorate or for the Liberal Party. But I fundamentally believed that I would rather risk it and focus on my home than just try and jump around. And that's not to criticise other people that do that. Everyone's got different motivations, but my connection to this community was one of the key drivers for me to put my hand up. And Tony had been an amazing local member of parliament, a great speaker. And without trying to sound too arrogant, I really felt like, well, if not me, then who? I didn't think anyone else was better placed to represent the Liberal Party, to represent our community in federal parliament. So that was ultimately the final thing. I always said, and I genuinely mean this, people used to say, oh, did you, like, I've always wanted to become a politician. Like, it was, even as I was a young kid, it was a bit, it was a dream. But I didn't know I was going to put my hand up to become the member for Casey and to seek Liberal pre-selection until Tony announced his retirement. Because again, if he'd gone another 10 years, it changes the dynamic. So that was it. Once he decided, then I was all in on this opportunity, and fortunate enough to win pre-selection and hold on. It was a pretty tough election for the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I think you're still in contact with Tony. Am I correct?
Yeah,
still
correct.
talking to.
So we talk quite a lot. He's a good friend, a good mentor. I was a volunteer. I haven't really touched on it, but I was a volunteer, his membership officer on his FEC for 7 or 8 years on the local state SEC Evelyn. So I was deeply involved as a volunteer and a senior official at a local level out in the Yarra Valley in the Evelyn state seat, which Bridget Valance, which I know you've spoken to, now represents, and Christine Fife before her, and Tony. So, which was one of the reasons I was able to win the pre-selection. So he's been a friend and a supporter of mine since I joined the party. And yeah, we still catch up and talk quite regularly. And he's a great source of knowledge and advice. But he doesn't, I'm very fortunate, he doesn't get too involved. He gives me my space to create my own, I guess, legacy in this journey.
Yeah, I think Tony Smith is one of the better speakers that we've ever had in the House of Representatives. So, he's a great mentor to have, I'd be guessing. And he's got heaps of experience in parliament. I think he was there for over 20 years. So he knows the ins and outs.
Longest serving member of Casey, 21 years. So, great experience. And he brought, you're right, Francis, he brought respect back to the speakership and to the House at a time when it really needed it 7 or 8 years ago. So, yeah, I'm very lucky to call him a friend and mentor.
Yeah. We'll now move on to our fifth question. So, who would you say is your political role model / idol?
Yeah.
Would it be Tony Smith?
It would be in locally, but the first one, definitely Tony, because I work so closely with him, and I came in. I sort of look back and laugh now, but when I first joined the party, he sent me a letter saying, "Let's have a coffee," and I sort of cringe at how excited I was to. I still tell him we joke about this, but how excited I was to have a coffee with him, and he was very generous with his time. But that's something that has stayed with me, and now I love to try and pay it forward to young people that want to catch up, or to be honest, doing the podcast and trying to share what I've learned, because so many people were really generous with me. So Tony, definitely. And interestingly, there's a bit of a weird connection, because Tony used to work for Peter Costello, and I've been fortunate. I actually caught up for a coffee with Peter Costello yesterday, and again had a bit of a moment of like, if you told 18-year-old Aaron you were doing this, you'd be quite surprised. But Peter was my first political hero and idol, and in many ways one of the reasons I became a Liberal. And looking back, I think my Year 12 politics teacher had worked out that what I thought where I thought I was at politically was different to where I was at, because they assigned me to do a profile on Peter Costello, and as I was doing that profile, I'm like, oh, well, he thinks this. Well, that makes sense, and he thinks about individual responsibility. So as I was researching Peter and his values and his beliefs and what he stood for, I realised that that's actually what I believe. So that was quite an interesting, again, discovery journey that, looking back, the teacher definitely set me up without telling me that. So that's always been something that, and then following his career and obviously his role as treasurer, and I think where he hasn't got the respect, he's well respected, don't get me wrong, but you look at a lot of the instability politics has had in the last since 2007, last 15 years, there's been quite a lot of political instability, and history now looks at the Howard era and the Howard Costello era, and there's no doubt Peter played a huge role, not just as an amazing treasurer, but as a loyal supporter of John Howard, and didn't seek to undermine him, or and was really, in many ways, put his own ambitions aside to be a loyal deputy and a loyal treasurer in a great government that set the country up for success. And looking back, it's probably underappreciated how important that was to the country. So yeah, he's definitely someone that I admired from afar, and I'm now fortunate to be able to catch up semi-regularly with him and talk about politics and life, and ask him questions. So yeah, definitely Peter Costello and Tony Smith. And as I said, Tony worked for Peter, so there's a bit of a small connection there as well.
Yeah, a whole little political triangle, I guess, between you three. But yeah, I think Tim Costello as well. Peter Costello. One of the is probably one of the better treasurers I've ever had in history, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you look at
I think
the surpluses. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as well, one of the key things that I remember from I've been told from my parents that he brought up in as treasurer was, payments towards newly born babies. So you get a $1,000 to $1,000 subsidy from the government, and that goes towards like costs, for a newborn child.
Baby bonus. Yeah. And
the baby bonus. Yeah.
Have one for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
Exactly. Yeah. That was
that was his line.
I said that in a previous interview actually with Paul Fletcher. So that was a line I actually did tell him. So, and I think Tobias, George, and myself, we were kind of part of that baby bonus as well, because we were all born during that Costello period as treasurer. So we're all children of the baby bonus.
There you are. It's paying off.
It is paying off. Yeah. We'll move on now to our sixth question. I think Tobias, you have the next question.
Yes, I do. What's your main focus for 2024 to help the people of KC?
Yeah, the main focus is really on trying to support the community with cost of living relief, and it's hard. It's frustrating in opposition that you can't directly influence you can't make the changes directly, but we've seen we do have the ability to influence the political agenda, and we saw that in the last 6 weeks with border security and the Home Affairs portfolio and the High Court case, whereby creating that pressure, the government had to move on legislation, and in some cases they took our amendments and implemented them fully. So we can shape the agenda, and we've seen this government over the 18 months that they've been elected be distracted with other issues, obviously the voice referendum and things like that. And cost of living is the biggest issue for my community. People are struggling to pay the mortgages. Their power bills are going up. Food costs are going up. So we need to, as an opposition, and I'm committed as a member of the team, to continue to put pressure on the government to give people support around their cost of living. And my EFO's out today, but the Treasurer's already flagged that there's not going to be any support for Australians in this My EFO update, and they'll have to wait till May, which is really disappointing because it's another 6 months away, and that's not going to help people that are struggling today. And there's decisions the government, I won't go too much into it, but decisions the government made, like the $45 billion in off-budget spending, that is driving inflation, and that's why the RBA governor said it's homegrown. That's why the interest rates are going up. So that's the biggest issue my community has. It's something I'll continue to talk about, continue to make sure that we're holding the government to account, and hopefully building the political pressure that they'll start to act, because they're not. And that links also to prices of housing, which you'd all be well aware of as young people finishing university or high school and starting university, and looking at housing prices and thinking about how you're going to be able to buy a house in 5, 6, 7 years, whenever you choose to make that decision. So we need to create a society where everyone who wants to can own a home, regardless of their family financial situation. And I wouldn't have been able to buy a home if I needed my mum to support me. She wasn't in that financial situation, and every Australian should have that opportunity. So that's the big couple of issues. I mean, housing's a long-term one, but we need to be talking about it. We need to take strong policies to the next election around housing, and day-to-day pressure on cost of living, so the government start to act, because I don't think they're doing enough at the moment.
Yeah, cost of living is a huge issue, even within our electorate. We're in a pretty safe Labor electorate of Jollybrand. It is still a huge, it's still a huge issue here as well. And housing affordability, as Tony Barry said, it's the political fault line in Australian politics, because I guess both sides haven't really done enough to combat it. And even for all three of us, in the next 6, 7 years, we'll be looking to buy our first home. And house prices, even in Point Cook where we are, like, I think median house price around 600, 700 thousand dollars a year. So not even 600,000. It's a wide range, and it's continuously just going up as well. So it's a very, very scary time for all of us. So we do really need the government and both major political parties to be on the side of young people looking to buy their first homes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any from your point of view, Aaron, do you have any suggestions that you think the government should be doing to improving housing affordability? Or
I mean, well, it's pretty cliche, but it's true. Like, supply and demand, it's economics 101, and the challenge we've got is we're not building enough houses, but we're also, and it's starting to get some more coverage now, but the migration levels, we've had 500,000 people come into the country in the last 12, 18 months. I think it's 12 months, and we built maybe 100,000 homes. So if you add 500,000 people and you only add 100,000 homes, and most people are moving into Sydney and Melbourne, that's going to put pressure on. There's things, councils have a role to play. Like, there's a development out in my electorate called Kinley Estate, and it's taken a long time for council and state government to give permits so they can build the houses. So we need, streamlined processes. I'm concerned about the government's announcement yesterday about the migration announcement. There seems to be some good things in there, but to not have tradies as a fast skill line is concerning because of the shortage in skills. So we've got to just get more houses built, and then that puts more stock in the market and will automatically bring prices down. That's the fundamental problem. And then there's other supports we can provide. Help to buy and these kind of schemes play an important role. But if there's not the supply there, it's just going to drive the price up, because you got 20 people bidding for one house. That's the problem. I remember going through it and saying to my wife, if you only need one person prepared to pay $1,000 more than you for a house, then you miss out. And that's why it's so tough to get in.
Exactly. I think as well, with a higher migration, I guess what the government's trying to do there is, that we do have huge skill shortages in a lot of industries. So bringing in more migrants, I guess, could help out, especially within, the trades industry could help out supply, I guess.
Yeah.
But if it's not all for the trades industry, it's not going to really help out supply and make us build more houses, and especially with, a lot of the big housing companies like Porter Davis and all them closing down. It's really, really hurt the whole housing industry and the building industry in general.
Correct. And don't get me wrong, migration is crucial. It's been the backbone of our country. My family, as I said, came across from Italy in the 50s. So it'd be a hypocrite if I said we need to stop migration. And no one's saying that. And we're not trying to demonize migrants at all. They're crucial to who we are as a country. But it needs to be done in a planned and systematic way to make sure that the country's growing and everyone benefits. Migrants, and it doesn't help a migrant if they come into the country and they can't get a house and they're paying too much and the roads are full and the hospitals are full. It's to everyone's benefit if we get it right and we manage it properly.
Yeah, and from my own personal viewpoint as well, I think another thing the government should be doing as well is making it, I guess, enticing more people to move into regional areas and regional towns, not to your major cities like Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, because these regional towns, they're desperate for workers. They need people there. So I think moving people to like towns like Ballarat, Bendigo, in New South Wales, like towns like Newcastle, Wollongong, like those sort of places where they need people and they're struggling with industries there. If you can move businesses over there and entice them to work from these regional towns, you're going to have people moving there, which will then take their pressure, I guess, from Melbourne and Sydney housing markets, which will then in turn reduce prices, hopefully.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll now move on to our final question. So, finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering high school or university?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a lot of advice. But I would say just remember the next 12 months won't define the person you are. I think I was mentioning before we got on, but 20 plus years later, I don't remember my ATAR, but I know I remember I didn't get quite what I wanted, and been really disappointed. And it felt like my life was over, and it obviously wasn't. But do your best. I mean, it doesn't define your life, but it is an important year. And you want to try and do as well as you can. But remember, as I look back on my life, every setback, looking back afterwards, once I'd got through the pain or the challenge or the disappointment, I'm so glad it happened, because I learned more from disappointment and from setback and rejection, and mistakes I made, and I've made a lot. You learn more from those than you do from the good times. And the only thing I can guarantee everyone listening is, even if everything's going great now, at some point you'll face adversity in life, and how you deal with the adversity you face will define the person you become in the future. And I'll give them two books. I love reading books, so I'll give two book recommendations, or three actually. I'll cheat my own rules, but I'd read Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. That changed my view. I had a fixed mindset until I read her book about growth mindset and understood what that was. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is Stoic philosophy. I found that during COVID. And looking back, if I'd found that at 18 or 19, it would have been amazing. But it's quite a heavy book. So if you can't read sort of an old diary from a Roman emperor, Ryan Halliday does. Ego is the Way. I've got his books all up here somewhere. But Ryan Halliday, Ego is the Enemy, Obstacle is the Way. He does quite few books, which is a modern take on Stoic philosophy. So if anyone wants to read a bit about that, it's a great sort of skill set or beliefs and philosophy to help with life.
Yeah. Thanks for those book suggestions for our audience. I'm hoping they all go out and read those books. Even Tobias and George, if you want to go out and read those books, including myself as well. I guess those are good suggestions from you, Aaron. So yeah, we'll give those a read, hopefully. Yeah, anything that can help, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all our questions. I'd like to thank you again, Aaron, for joining us for over an hour. I realize you are very, very busy, especially with it coming to Christmas now, and because I myself am actually doing a bit of intern work at Trung Lu's office in state parliament. So yeah, so I kind of know it is a very busy time in the office. So I really do appreciate you coming on and having an interview with us for the last hour. It's been really good to talk about these important issues, especially for the people of Casey and for all students across Australia.
No, fantastic. Thanks for having me. And yeah, thank you all for your initiative to do this podcast. Hopefully the listeners have found the hour interesting.